I think we should decide among themselves just so because it's the book review, sort of. No, ma khayal je khatak se katasu political tool structure
yeah, I think it's too late.
Yeah, we are live on Facebook, by the way.
We are?
We are. So,
okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. This is such a great honor and such a great privilege for me and for all of my colleagues at the Heart of Asia Society to be able to organize this program and to be able to welcome all of our participants from across the world for this discussion today. And I'm especially delighted to welcome our moderator for the discussion, Ms. Shafiqa Khalwak, one of our brightest young poetesses and literary stars. Shafiqa Khalwak is also a columnist, a writer, and a translator. She graduated from the American University of Afghanistan, studied political science and public administration, and currently she works as a director at the Musawir Foundation, which works for children, literature, education, and their rights advocacy. I also want to express special thanks to Bilal Zahoor of Folio Books in Lahore, Pakistan, for jointly hosting this event with us, and to Shandana Humayun Khan, the real force behind the publication of this English translation of Bacha Khan's autobiography, My Life and Struggle, which Sahibzada Imtiaz Sahib has rightly dedicated to her. I am especially delighted to welcome Afrasiyab Khatak Sahib, Sahibzada Sahib himself, and also Dr. Nooreen Nasir, who have joined us today for this discussion. And given the gravity of the situation in Afghanistan and in the region, especially in our two countries, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the yearning of both peoples for peace, dignity, and development, I think this is absolutely the right time to put the spotlight on Bacha Khan's philosophy, an example of nonviolent resistance, peace, and public service. More than anything, I hope today's event is seen as a humble tribute to the enduring legacy and impact of Bacha Khan, Fakhri Afghan's thinking and action, his way, his path. And I'm delighted to see, as I just mentioned, so many in the audience from around the world for this live streamed webinar. My thanks go to them as well, and I encourage them to share their thoughts and questions with us throughout the course of today's event. With that, I am extremely privileged and honored to hand over to Shafiqa Khalwak to moderate our discussion today. Khalwak Sahib, over to you. Khalwak Sahib, can you hear me? Khalwak Sahib, can you hear me?
Hello?
Yes, we're good, I think. Khalwak Sahib?
Yes,
It's over to you, Khalwak Sahib, so you can lead us in moderating this discussion.
Connection. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, this is Shafiqa Khalwak, and it's my first ever public event that I will be speaking in English, and I'm a little bit nervous and excited at the same time. I welcome you all to today's amazing discussion about a great leader and a great personality, Bacha Khan's life and his struggle. At the time where the region is inflicted with unbearable violence, particularly in Afghanistan, this timely event aims to discuss the non-violence legacy of Abdul Ghaffar Khan, also known as Bacha Khan. Many call him a frontier Gandhi, but I think I won't. There is a research by Ahmadullah Archiwal who argued that he calling him frontier Gandhi is not actually right. He's as before Khan he did education, social reforms, and nonviolent political struggle. The book My Life and Struggle was his autobiography published by the Afghan government of the time, and it is now translated into English. Fortunately, everyone around the world can read about him. By Saib, many congratulations on the wonderful job that you have done. Today, we will be discussing his philosophy, his politics, his social reforms, and education with wonderful, great intellectuals. But first of all, we will hear from Sahibzada Sahib that why he decided to translate this book in 2021. What does it have for us? What can we learn from it in today's world? What is the importance and significance of this of the autobiography? Sahibzada Sahib.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Shafiq Khalwak, I had gone through pieces of Bacha Khan's autobiography well before I started translating it. It was many years after that on the request of Shandana, I decided to take up the translation in earnest and to dedicate the book to her. I am grateful to her, therefore, for the book and its publication and the many problems that we encountered on the way, which she, as you can see, successfully resolved. I had heard of Bacha Khan as a child, but had never seen or listened to him until I went to his eldest son's Ghani's house one evening, and I found father and son engaged in discussing the effect of oil on international politics and strategy. Not knowing enough about the subject, I decided to remain silent while the two went on. A little later, Ghani's wife Roshan sent us some tea and some halwa in 3 specific saucer plates. Ghani and I quickly gulped down our share while Bacha Khan quietly observed us. Then, with a smile on his face, he pushed the saucer towards me and said, "Here, take my share as well." So I had to oblige and took a double helping of the halwa. He was then a very old and emaciated young man, and his nose almost took up the entire face, as it were. I next saw him when I went to Ghani's house to invite him for my youngest brother's wedding, who incidentally was engaged to Bacha Khan's youngest son, Abdul Ali Khan's daughter. After that, I saw him when he came in from Afghanistan on standing up in a truck in the winter of 1973. I was then the Secretary Information of the government of NWFP and had to go to welcome him. He was clad in his traditional clothes of grey shalwar kameez with a cap on his head of the same cloth, and his companion carried his 2 pairs of clothes in a small bundle in his hand. The Afghans had turned out in great number to wish him farewell at the border, and just as he crossed that big mound they covered with red cloth and showered flowers on him. We had gone in great numbers to welcome him from abroad and had taken a lot of marigold flowers with us. As he stood up in that truck, open truck, clad in just those pair of clothes and a chadar to cover him against the cold of the winter in Torkham, people showered flowers, marigold flowers on him, which he would occasionally catch in the air and throw back at them. Such was the large crowd that was assembled that it took us 4 hours to get from Torkham to Peshawar, a journey which normally took an hour and a half. I next saw him when, along with Arbab Jahangir, the chief minister of the province, and I was then the chief secretary, went to the Peshawar airport to receive him after he had suffered from a stroke while under treatment in Delhi. He was accompanied by his daughter and 1 or 2 Indian ministers. We took him to the Lady Reading Hospital, and after giving a cup of tea to the Indian delegation, we bid them goodbye back to Delhi. The next time I saw him was when I attended his janaza at the Jinnah Park in Peshawar as part of a delegation from the federal government with which I was then serving on the express orders of General Ziaul Haq, that I, having been the chief secretary of the province at the time, should also go and pay my respects. It was a very memorable afternoon, and there was no place in the Jinnah Park, which is a fairly large area with a raised platform on which his coffin was raised. He was then taken to Jalalabad and was buried there, and it is to the credit of the Afghan people that they had a ceasefire for those few hours under which his burial was taking place. An unfortunate incident did, however, occur, but the scale was not very large. Bacha Khan's life has a certain importance for the people of both the countries, India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And it is his message of peace and non-violent resistance and his moderate Islam that is a lasting message which, if followed, would be beneficial to both the countries. to the Pukhtuns, his legacy has been tremendous. He set out as a social reformer, and under his organization called the Anjumani Islaul Afagina, and many a social evil it was that by example he set aside, and the people willingly followed him. He then, after forming the Khudai Khidmatgars, enrolled in the Khudai Khidmatgars those people amongst our society which are the downtrodden classes, the classes which are not the landowning class or the Pushtun or the Afghan class as such. And it was them to whom he delegated authority and power in his organization and set out to if not eliminate totally, at least to whittle down the differences between these various castes in our Pushtun society, which were as bad as the castes of the Hindu society, the caste-bound Hindu society. He was a great advocate of women's education and women's liberation, and also education as such, and managed to establish a number of madrasas in the many districts of the frontier before the British government cracked down on them and he had to retract. His life is a great example to us of stubborn resistance to autocratic power and the belief in a democratic order and a free country, free of the yoke of British colonialism. This, I hope, will serve as a brief introduction to what we are going to discuss today, and therefore I think I will leave it at that.
We have some technical issues in Kabul. Ambassador Musazai, if you could please take over while Mr. Khulwak is trying to fix her computer issues in Kabul.
With great pleasure. With great pleasure. Thank you so much, Saibzada Saib. I think we owe you a deep debt of gratitude for the tremendous work that you have done in translating Bacha Khan's autobiography from the original Pashto, or as you call it, Pukhto, into English, thus making it available to a much, much wider audience globally. So thank you for that, and thank you for that tremendous introduction. Just maybe by way of a brief introduction to Saibzada Saib for the benefit of our audience members. Saibzada Saib is a distinguished senior civil servant in Pakistan. He is a highly regarded and highly respected Pashtun intellectual, retired senior government civil servant, and a personal friend of Bacha Khan's son, another towering figure of the region, Abdul Ghani Khan. And this is one of many works of literature and intellectual endeavor that Saibzada Saib has produced over the past many years. So thank you, Saibzada Saib, for that. Khulwaq Saib is back, so I will hand over back to you, Khulwaq Saib. I just gave a few words of introduction for Saibzada Saib, and I think you can move us to Khatak Saib if you would like.
Thank you very much. I think internet is doing Ramazi for me. It is disconnecting. So thank you very much, Saibzada Saib, though I didn't hear everything that you said, but that was wonderful. Everybody knows Khatak Saib. He is a Pashtun and human rights activist intellectual from Pakhtunkhwa. He is being engaged in political activism since 1970s. Khatak Saib, I would love to hear some general words about Bacha Khan's autobiography and what he has left for us. Whenever I write something about him in social media, many people approach that he was not as successful as he could be, and they refer to nonviolence as a weakness, something that weak people do it, not as a strength or power or a powerful tool for political resistance. What do you think about that?
Thank you very much, Shafiqa Jan. With the permission of my esteemed friends in the panel, I would like to submit that first of all, we must thank Folio Books, Heart Aphasia Society for organizing today's webinar and giving us an opportunity to say a few words about Bacha Khan, who has been an inspiration for many generations of Pashtuns and other people in this region. I would start by saying that, as Saibzada Saib has pointed out, Bacha Khan was originally a reformer. He started his work as reformer, social reformer, who focused on spreading education. But as the British colonialists blocked his activities, blocked that movement, arrested people, and stopped them from working for spreading education, they got politicized. And he started a movement in the subsequent years, which was called the Khudai Khidmatgar. And this Khudai Khidmatgar joined hands with All India National Congress for liberation of South Asia from British colonialism. And it was a very difficult struggle, but Bacha Khan and his comrades came out with flying colors by putting up very strong and determined resistance against colonialism. His life actually has two stages. First was a struggle against Britishers, and the other is a struggle for peace, democracy, and rights of oppressed nations in Pakistan. And I think in both these stages, his contribution is remarkable. I think we can remember him as someone who actually taught us the new way of thinking, particularly among Pashtuns. For example, he reformed Pashtun Wali, our traditional way of life or tribal way of life, which has existed in our society for long centuries. And it has been very difficult for our people to come out of this. But in 20th century, Bacha Khan introduced new elements in this Pashtun Wali. For example, he emphasized on getting educated, and he meant it for both boys and girls. He also taught us equality in a caste society in subcontinent of India, where castes were very strong. Even among Pashtuns, I mean, people who used to work with their hands, manual work, they were looked down upon. Bacha Khan taught us that it is wrong. Similarly, his contribution in non-violence I think he was able to prepare a very large body of human being. I mean, he created an army of non-violence who waged non-violence in practice. And they practiced it in their struggle against British colonialism. And even after the creation of Pakistan, he continued his peaceful and non-violent struggle. He had learned a lot from the book of life. He says, and I quote, "One learns a great deal in the school of sufferings. I wonder what would have I been, what would have happened to me if I had an easy life and had not the privilege of tasting the joys of jail and all it means." So he has learned a lot during his struggle, and he spread this consciousness among his fellow Pashtuns and fellow human beings. You see, his nationalist struggle was not racist, was not limited to Pashtuns. He made it to the mainstream of South Asian politics. That is why his legacy has existed despite state repression under Britishers, and also during the time of during Pakistan, because he is not a part of the national curriculum. The official history books do not speak about him, but he still is there. So, and he also knew the problems of Pashtun emanating from their geography. And he says, and I quote him again, he says, "Our fault is that our province is the gateway to India. We were born in the frontier province. That is why we are doomed." So you see, this geography, it still haunts us, even today, as we are speaking, this geostrategic location. But he was not a pessimist. He always believed in the good future of humanity. I think his reforms and awareness efforts were part of the greater effort of renaissance among Afghans and Pashtuns. In Afghanistan, this movement manifested itself in the form of the reforms introduced by Shah Amanullah Khan. But the difference was that Amanullah Khan's reforms were top bottom. They came from the state, from above, and Bacha Khan's movement was a grassroots movement. But both movements aimed at a renaissance where people should get education, people should learn about democracy, human rights. He was particularly conscious of inclusion of women in social and political life. And he started it from his own house. He provided opportunity to his only daughter to get educated, not only in the subcontinent, but also she went to Europe for education, higher education. And I think we still have very strong influence of Bacha Khan's ideas and our movement today among Pashtuns. I can report to you that when I was provincial president of the Awami National Party, the party that has been following in his footsteps, we introduced, for example, mother tongues for education in our province, and we introduced 5 languages. Pashto was, of course, at the top of the list, but apart from Pashto, we had Hindko, Saraiki, Chatrali, and Kohistani. You see, Bacha Khan had taught us that all mother tongues should be respected, particularly languages spoken on our land. You see, this broad-mindedness, it taught us a lot. It is, I think, very important today for peaceful coexistence among people of different identities. And I think Bacha Khan is like a bridge. His personality, start and struggle, his life story is a bridge between 3 countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. And that's why you see when he died in January 1988, he was somebody who had never been in power. But the flags in all these 3 countries came down to mourn his death. So I think he is respected, and he's an asset. His life and struggle is an asset for the people of all these three countries. And I believe that if our future generations will rediscover him, because we need nonviolence. And because of this geography, he knew that violence can be our enemy. And I think those who call his nonviolence a failure should look at the trouble created by violence, continuous violence.
We can come.
Thank you very much.
I think we will have another question on this. It's a very important topic. Thank you very much, Khatak Saib. My next question will be to Ambassador Janan Musazai Saib, who was born in 1980 in Kabul. Musazai Saib is former Afghan diplomat who left government service in 2008 to join the private sector. He is co-founder and vice president of the Heart of Asia Society. Musazai Saib was also ambassador of Islamic Republic of Afghanistan to the People's Republic of China in 2016 to 2018, and to the Islamic Republic of Pakistan in January 2014 to 2016. He also worked with the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNIMA, focusing mainly on political affairs and human rights issues. Ambassador Musazai Saib studied medicine at Kabul University and international relations at the American University of Central Asia, Bishkek, Kazakhstan. He holds a Master of Journalism degree from the School of Journalism and Communication at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. Musazai Saib, my question will be kind of the same. Recently I did a research on Bacha Khan's education, Bacha Khan and nonviolence education in Afghanistan and school curriculum. He's missing from our school books, and Khatak Saib also mentioned he's not part of national curriculum in Pakistan too. Only in the history book of 12th grade, he was mentioned just 2 sentences about him, that he was nonviolent, nonviolent political activist in Pakhtunkhwa, and his one picture with Sardar Muhammad Dawood Khan. Nothing else about him. Why is he missing from Afghanistan, and particularly from this national school curriculum? And what has he left on this side of the Durand line? We see this on the other side of the Durand line. For example, PTM can be an example of his legacy, and women participation in politics and social activities. But what has he left for us on this side of the Durand line? What do you think?
Well, thank you so much, Folio Saib. I think that's an extremely important question. But if you allow me, perhaps I could suggest a few points for our discussion today. And in the course of doing that, I will try to address the important question or questions that you've posed. Rereading Bacha Khan's My Struggle and Life in Saibzada Imtiaz Saib's impeccable English translation one more time last night, just as I was preparing for this discussion today, I was really struck by just how farsighted and correct Bacha Khan was in his vision. He not only cared for people, especially women, children, and the poor, he also deeply cared and advocated for the humane treatment of animals and the protection and preservation of the natural environment around him, urging people to live in harmony with nature. And I think that's something that, looking back to when he lived, was extraordinary, completely extraordinary. But he had that vision and that foresight. The book also reminded me just how much more difficult nonviolent resistance and action is compared to violence. Bacha Khan and other great practitioners of nonviolence around the world, including Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mandela, and others, showed greater imagination and courage to organize jalsas and sit-ins, boycotts, demonstrations, and so on. And you mentioned PTM, they're doing it today. His example also shows us that pacifism is not nonviolence. It's a much more passive distance from violence, whereas nonviolence is a philosophy of proactive action, courageous action. Bacha Khan spent nearly 30 years of his life in prison, and he has and his Khudai Khidmatgar suffered unimaginable brutality, first at the hands of the British, and then at the hands of the officials and security agencies of independent Pakistan. But he pressed on and never wavered in his commitment to his chosen path. And Bacha Khan also showed us that it's not the largest group, but the best organized that prevails. I think this is a lesson that is extremely relevant for us in Afghanistan. One man, led an entire movement. The success of PTM today, as you mentioned, Khulwaq, also owes to the adherence of its leaders and organizers to this key tenet of nonviolent struggle, and I think they have been successful. Bacha Khan stood up for the equality of women and men, as both Saibzada Saib and Khatak Saib have pointed out, and fiercely advocated for the education of women, sending his own daughter to school in the face of family and community disapproval. He stood up for their God-given rights, including the right to inheritance, and opposed many other anti-woman traditions among his Pashtun people, some of which sadly continue to this day. If you allow me, I'll just propose a couple of thoughts with an emphasis on the relevance of Bacha Khan's philosophy and example for us in Afghanistan today, as you have asked. I'll focus on the ongoing war in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, and the search for peace in our region, and link that to what we can learn from Bacha Khan's teaching and example today. The first relevant is the futility of violence and war. All sides in the current Afghan war, from the government to the Taliban, the United States, Pakistan, and others, agree on the futility of a military solution. However, the war goes on. We could perhaps blame the departing American military for ignoring repeated calls by Afghans and people in the region to prioritize a peaceful settlement early on and support negotiations between the Afghan government and the Taliban years ago, before the US decided it wanted to withdraw and started its own direct withdrawal negotiations, I must add, with the Taliban. However, the failure of peacemaking over the years also lies with leaders in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Afghan leaders could have and should have taken a firmer position and better managed the early peace and reconciliation efforts, at least going back 10 years, which instead got mired in endless disagreements over strategy and tactics. Many programs were turned into personal enrichment projects, programs that were related to promoting peace and reconciliation. Leaders in Pakistan, especially in the Pakistani military, chose to stay a party to the war by hosting and supporting the Taliban instead of championing a peaceful settlement that would ensure all of Pakistan's own legitimate interests and concerns in Afghanistan. Even now that the US military is on its way out, the Taliban are still beating the drums of a military victory and have intensified violence across Afghanistan, which has diminished the chances of a negotiated settlement and increased the suffering of ordinary people immensely. This escalation in violence has also prompted the government to adopt an increasingly militaristic language, ostensibly pushing back against the notion of government weakness. So both sides must prioritize peace. Pakistan, as I've just pointed out, is not fully behind the search for a peaceful settlement in Afghanistan, sadly, at least in action. And action is obviously what matters. The language spoken by Pakistani leaders today, including in the military, is different, which is a welcome sign. We have heard from Prime Minister Imran Khan and the Chief of Army Staff, General Bajwa, and about Pakistan's supposed paradigm shift from geopolitics to geoeconomics. But this is nothing new. It has been bandied about at least since 2013 that I remember. Therefore, Pakistan must take action wherever it can, especially in making it clear to the Taliban that now that the US is out or almost out of Afghanistan, militarily, Pakistan will support them only in making peace with the government of Afghanistan. And then it should refrain from attempts at dictating the terms of Afghan peace negotiations, because any peace agreement that comes out of genuine Afghan-owned and Afghan-led peace talks will favor Pakistan more than any other country in the region or beyond. Because Khulwaq Sahib, I think you can agree, and I hope other panelists would agree as well, there is today a broad consensus in Afghanistan that the country's relationship with Pakistan is vital. So Pakistan should embrace and respect Afghanistan as an independent neighbor and abandon this fantasy of controlling Afghanistan as a client state through coercion, through violence. That won't happen. Bacha Khan's philosophy is also relevant in the realm of social progress, especially education and nation building, particularly as it relates to engendering a culture of peace and nonviolent struggle in all walks of life. Not just nonviolent resistance against oppression and war, but nonviolence as required in everyday facet of daily life. from interpersonal relationships to how we deal with the environment and so on. And Bacha Khan's philosophy, as you have posed the question, Akhbar Waqsid, must become part of a civic education curriculum in both Afghanistan and Pakistan for schools, madrasas, and universities. Why is this important? I believe that this is essential in the face of growing radicalization, especially among the youth of both Afghanistan and Pakistan. We must confront this menace because if left unchecked, it can exponentially exacerbate the security and development challenges of both countries and the entire region in the years to come. This is a storm that can destroy both countries and the region. We must instead focus on social and economic development as preached and practiced by Bacha Khan to provide hope to the bulging youth populations in both countries. So as we rediscover Bacha Khan's timeless and timely philosophy and role model, we must commit to grounding a new long-term vision and strategy for peace and progress in our region. And this might be actually, this may sound a little dramatic, but I think this might be our last best chance in the region to ensure lasting peace in Afghanistan and Pakistan. If we don't do that, another external superpower may someday soon, maybe not in 5 years, maybe not in 10 years, but soon enough could come back to our region and haunt us even longer. Just one last point and I'll stop. Khatak referred to this point as well. Bacha Khan taught us not only throughout his life, but he left a lasting legacy and lesson for the people of Afghanistan and Pakistan by asking that he be buried in Jalalabad on the Afghanistan side of the Durand Line, not on the Pakistan side of the Durand Line. Through this singular act, this towering figure of history showed that we are one people and that no power can divide us. And I think that is an example from which we must learn and recognize the meaninglessness of modern boundaries and borders and focus on the more important issues that Bacha Khan spent nearly 30 years of his life in prison and struggled for every day, which Khatak Sahib and Saibzada Sahib have enunciated in great detail. So I'll stop there and look forward to comments and any questions.
Thank you very much. I would like to come to Dr. Noreen Nasser, who is a resident of Kurma district of the ex-tribal area Fata. She specializes in Pakistan, Afghanistan border areas, gender and conflict issues. She is a faculty member of the Department of Political Science at the University of Peshawar. She has worked in issues faced by tribal women in the newly merged tribal district since 1998 and is a founding member of the Qabaili Khor Tribal Sisters Network. She has authored several publications in local and international journals on Pakistan, Afghanistan border areas, conflict, peace building, and issues related to women and children. Her efforts have been recognized through her nomination for the UNDP N Peace Award, UN Told Stories Award in 2008. She is a member of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Commission on the Studies of Women. Dr. Noreen, Bacha Khan worked as a social reformist in a tribal community, and this tribalism still exists on both sides of the Durand Line, with very strict cultures and social behavior. Particularly women and children are the main victims of these we can say tribalism or cultures. They're deprived of their basic rights of education, healthcare, and social participation. Through Bacha Khan's philosophy, what we can do for women and children today, and why would people listen to us? Like when we use Bacha Khan as an example, like he did this, why would they listen to us? How can we still continue these reforms that he has started in 20th century? How can we still use it for today's life in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, particularly for children and women, and in education too?
Thank you, Shafiqa. Thank you very much for a generous introduction. Thank you, Sahibzada Sahab, for making this book translated into English so I can refer it to the students and they can read it. As you know, that in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, or even in India, Pashto is not understood in the written scripture. So I think that's a commendable job that you have done. And in fact, you have contributed to the academia, I would say. And another thing that I want to add, as we are saying that it's not in the syllabus, and I am teaching to my PhD and MPhil students, Bacha Khan, not only as a reformer in the peace studies, but also as a feminist Pakhtun, and also against those oppressive practices. So he is our focus. He is a major contributor to our course. And also we have, our department have supervised a PhD dissertation on Begum Naseem Wali Khan. And of course, Bacha Khan simply cannot be separated if we are working on Begum Naseem Wali Khan. So this is something that I wanted to share with the audience and with the panel, that of course here in Peshawar, we are doing a great job. And of course in Punjab University, several MPhil theses are also produced on Bacha Khan work and his contribution, and specifically on his non-violent movement. It's not that he's banned, he is very much here around us, and in every day we are learning from him. But the contribution that came from Sahibzada Imtiaz Sahab is that now it's easier for us to refer his book, especially the book that we are asked to and be a part of this panel, Bacha Khan, My Life and Struggle. Although it's available in Pashto, I was like, I read this book in Pashto, and then again I was reading this book when Shandana gifted this book to me. I like the question that you asked, Shafiqa, is very much is a part of our lives. Like when the day he's born, and then when he has this understanding, and as a child, he started talking about his mother and the influence that she had on him. And then in a very patriarchal structure, how he is sort of pampered. And then later on in the chapters, I see that how he is even saying that whatever my mother did at that time was wrong, supporting me in some of the mischiefs and not reporting to my father. But this is what the patriarchal structures of the Pakhtuns are, that it's always the male, the son, and the youngest are pampered one. And most of the time we just, do not want to discuss whatever is happening or whatever he's doing. In fact, we say, oh, he did a great job, or he's being so brave. But then when he started have these thinking faculties, he said, oh, whatever my mom did was wrong. But then in the book, when I'm reading, and because we are the generation that we have never met him. And when he died, we were hardly in schools. And so we had no idea what exactly his contributions are. But as a woman, when I started reading his life history and the way he's narrating, and specifically in terms of women, he is noticing each and every, whatever is happening in his house, that he noticed that the women folk eat after the men have eaten. And then when he's married, he makes his wife sit with him, and then they eat together. And then he writes in his book that he notices all this, and it's still happening in our culture. We are from the tribal society. We still are men. In some families, men eat before the woman, and later on the woman eat, and they have no interaction. So when there is no interaction, there is no sharing of the problems, and there is no sharing of the issues, whatever is happening with the woman or whatever the problems are. So what I see him as a feminist Pakhtun, and I take him as a role model. And of course, when we are in a conflict-ridden society and militarized structures, and then you see a man who is basically arguing for raising the moral standards of the people. And I'm not going to box him into a Pakhtun, or I'm not going to box him into a debate of him being a Pakhtun and reforming only Pakhtun society. I think anybody who is reading his life story would be, and any regressive society, any tribal society, whether it's located in Africa or whether that society is in Bangladesh or in India or in Afghanistan or Pakistan, or if it's a tribal areas, I would say that he argued for raising the moral standards of Pakhtun, and that in terms of treating their woman nicely. And that's why he refused the walwar, the bride money, when he got married. And he said, no, I'm not going to. And this is what is recorded in the book. So the first thing that we see, that he is debunking all those un-Islamic and those inhuman cultural practices which are relegating women to a piece of the property. He's saying, no, I don't want to accept any walwar, because we are equal in this relationship. So this is something, and this is something that he is, he's in fact giving this due respect to his father-in-law. And then we see that, and of course, he's then talking about the teachings of Islam and specifically to Prophet. And I again say that he is not an atheist, as most of the propaganda is that carried on against him in the media or in a different aspect. His closeness to the different people from the other religion is basically the humanity and his feminist behavior. It's nothing to do with him being an atheist. He's a very secular man, I would say that. And his vision is also shaped by local spiritual personalities, because in this book he is, and of course, when he's talking about treatment of the woman, he is also quoting Prophet, he's quoting these spiritual personalities. He is then, of course, even the organization that he started, a Society for the Reformation of Afghans, which Sahibzada Sahab has initially mentioned, Islahul Afghania, is basically also, when he's talking there and addressing people in different, because it's there in the book, he's talking about education for both men and women. So it means that he is challenging all those tribal practices, all those patriarchal practices. I would not say Pashtun practices, because these are common amongst all those tribal societies. As I mentioned, whether they're Africans or they are in Bangladesh or in India or in any, even in Central Asian Republic. I would say that even in that Society for Reformation of Afghans, he is talking about the woman education, and he's talking to the men to treat their women kindly. He is more specifically the educational opportunities for women. He says, and I read his quote when I was supervising one of the theses, and that girl brought that quote to me, and she said that, look, he says, and then I quote him, that if anyone wishes to know how civilized a culture is, she or he needs to look how they treat their woman. And it is also there in my office. And I say this is the first Pashtun feminist man who is talking about the rights of the woman, and is also, although we say that, that's why I don't want to box him in any ethnicity. And that's why I say that, that he is a man where that can be taken as a guideline, or his philosophy is a guideline for all those regressive societies where woman is treated or where they are marginalized in that society. So this is what we need to learn. Education for both men and women, compulsory education for the girls. And then we see that, a female writer, Alafjana Khataka, which I heavily quote in my work, and I also, when we are in the classroom, we are discussing his role as a feminist. Then Alafjana Khataka wrote a letter to Bacha Khan, which was then published in the Pakhtun Journal. She acknowledged the efforts of, at that time, the Khudai Khidmatgar for uplifting and protecting of the Pakhtuns. In that letter, which she's emphasizing, the support for female education throughout Pakhtun society, so that female may then support men in their struggle for awakening the masses and independence. And this is why it was published in that magazine, because here Alafjana Khataka is talking about awareness and awakening of the masses and independence. So I believe that his teaching, if it is inculcated, if it is taught, which we are doing, whatever at level, if it is taught, if this book is read widely, I think many of these patriarchal structures that we have nowadays in our tribal societies could be easily challenged, and we can easily convince the men in our families, men in our society, and the men that we are working with. So I believe that that's why I'm again thanking Sahibzada Saab that you have contributed to our course, and you have also contributed to our literature review. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a few points, Rajmoha, as you have mentioned, like he was not only, and other speakers too, that he was not only working for Pashtuns who were not Pashtun nationalists. Rajmohan Gandhi described him as someone who, he says, like, Bacha Khan loved humanity and every human being through the eyes of Pashtuns, or through this lens of Pashtun or Pashtun nationalists. So he was like for everyone. And about women, I remember he narrated in his book, in this My Life and Struggle, he talks with his wife and tells her that usually when woman dies, man can get another wife. If I die, I urge you to remarry. Don't settle for the established patriarchal norms. And this is wonderful. Thank you very much. Audience can ask the questions in the chat box. We will have time for that. You can put your questions here. Also, I would like to ask this question from Khatak Saib. Khatak Saib, Bacha Khan says himself that my nonviolent philosophy has roots in Islam. He was a Muslim, as Dr. Saib Nureen also mentioned. However, this religious extremism is around us in the region, and I don't know whether we try or not, but we cannot, in a way, escape it. It is everywhere in Pakistan, in Afghanistan. Is there any place in Bacha Khan's life and philosophy to fight religious extremism in the region and encourage people to accept diversity and social tolerance and social peace and harmony? How can we utilize that? Khatak Saib, your mic is off. Thank you.
Thank you. So nice of you. It's a very important question. And as I said earlier, Bacha Khan was a very practical man. He used to practice what he used to say. I mean, that's a very effective way of teaching others by example, by model. I think when this war in Afghanistan started, he clearly said that yes, Afghans are a freedom-loving people, and they would like to have a free country, which is their right. But he said this war, the way it is progressing, is becoming more and more a struggle between superpowers. I remember an Afghan leader who was very much involved in jihad in those days. I met him recently, and he said, I wish we had listened to him, because he said, I used to question him, but we are fighting Russians. Where are the Americans? He used to say, well, Americans are also around. They're not far away. They may not be visible, but you see, so he understood these things. But as you said, he had taken inspiration from the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. His nonviolence, Prophet, peace be upon him, was a model. And particularly his life in Mecca, when he started his preaching. At that time, he was opposed very strongly by others, but he was very forgiving, and he was very broad-minded. So that was his original inspiration. And in practice, I mean, he was a very strong Muslim. I worked with him after 1972 for more than a decade. And I can tell you that he was very much a religious man, but he never used religion for politics. He never, I was once sitting with him, somebody asked him, he was narrating, Bacha Khan was narrating his life story, that he went to Mecca, then he went to Jerusalem. He was talking about the death of his wife in Jerusalem. So somebody said, Bacha Khan, but why don't they call you Haji? He said, I did this for my belief. It's between me and God, me and Allah. He said, I pay zakat, but I can't call myself a zakati. I pray 5 times, but I can't call myself a namazi, because it's a matter of belief. So that was the difference. And as I said, in politics, he opposed exploiting religion for politics. And I think he was able to convince Pashtuns, Afghans, who were very strong Muslims, but he convinced them to come to nonviolence. Again, saying that it is best to forgive instead of taking revenge. Revenge is very old part of our custom tradition, tribal tradition. But you see, he was able to argue against that very effectively. So in many ways, he was able to teach people in practice that his nonviolence is not something alien or foreign or coming from any other. Of course, he was somebody who was prepared to learn from any source. I mean, he accepted truth from all places, but he said, we have our own traditions, even in this history, even in our Gandharan history, nonviolence is very deeply rooted. You see in the Gandharan civilization, which persisted here 2000 years back. So Bacha Khan respected all these sources. And as I said, he was a man of practice, and he worked together against Britishers with people of all religions in subcontinent to throw away the yoke of imperialism, of colonialism. He worked with Hindus, Sikhs, Christians, Buddhists, and Muslims, and all religions together. So I think he made a point by practicing what he was saying.
Thank you very much, Khatak Saib. I would love to hear from Ambassador Musazai Saib too about this.
I think this is a really important question, Khalwa Saib, and just following up on what Khatak Saib has just explained, I would refer to maybe a couple of facts and points. One is the fact that Bacha Khan worked very closely with the religious figures, or as he calls them in his autobiography, Maulanas, throughout his life and throughout his struggle to spread a message of public service, to encourage people to send their children to schools. He visited Deoband multiple times. He was very close to many of the leading religious scholars in Pakhtunkhwa, and he had them accompany him on a lot of his visits and travels, from community to community, from village to village, in establishing the different marakez or centers that he did establish for the Khidmatgars. So he was, as Khatek said, pointed out, a deeply spiritual Muslim who took inspiration from the Holy Quran and also the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He also initially, when he basically embarked on this journey of non-violent struggle, he started with the construction of madrasas, of religious seminaries in Pakhtunkhwa, not modern schools, because he saw that that's how you begin in this part of the world. And then finally, specifically with regards to your question of the extremism problem in our region today, we must recognize, I think, the fact that the modern extremism in Afghanistan and Pakistan does not have roots in the history or culture of this region. This ideology was imposed, it was imported to our region because of the Cold War, because of the struggle between the two superpowers, the use of extremism as a tool by the United States and its allies in the struggle, in the jihad against the Soviet Union. And this was precisely what I was trying to refer to in my initial remarks, that this is now becoming a problem of such magnitude that if it's not checked, if it's not stemmed now through positive collaboration and cooperation between Afghanistan and Pakistan, which means focusing on peace, which means focusing on economic development, which means focusing on education, that this wave of extremism can undermine security and stability and the welfare of people, not just in Afghanistan and Pakistan, but throughout the region.
Thank you. We have a question from audience. They have asked Saibzada Saib that in order to neutralize radicalization in both countries, what steps should be taken by both the countries by taking a leap from Bacha Khan's legacy? I think it's a kind of continuation of the same question. Saibzada Saib? Your mic is off. Saibzada Saib, if you can hear us, your mic is off.
Sorry, could I have that again?
Yes, the question is, in order to neutralize radicalization in both countries, what steps should be taken by both countries, that means Pakistan and Afghanistan, taking a leap from Bacha Khan's legacy?
Mm-hmm. Well, Bacha Khan's legacy is apparent to everyone for his non-violence and for his humanitarianism and for his lack of extremism. And in this context, it would be appropriate for both Pakistan and the other powers not to interfere in the Afghan process of bringing peace and stability to their country, which should then be assisted by these countries in a big way for socio-economic development.
Thank you very much. We have another question for Dr. Nasreen. Dr. Saib, it says that, is the idea of non-violence Mahatma Gandhi's or Bacha Khan's? Is the idea, it says is the idea of non-violence is Mahatma Gandhi's idea or Bacha Khan's idea? I mean, the philosophy of the non-violence.
You know, it's very interesting that both these these are the stalwart philosophers of the South Asia. So saying that whose idea was its first. When you see Bacha Khan and his Khudai Khidmatgar, it's, if you look at it, if you read in the book, if you read the commentaries on him, he mostly engages the Quranic scripture and the Prophet life, and then and of course connect the humanity with this whole debate. So in the beginning, if I recall, Shafiqa, you said that I don't want to call him Frontier Gandhi. Me too. I don't want to call him Frontier Gandhi. He's a very spiritual man, if we look at him. And his philosophy is very much grounded in these spiritualism. And both these stalwarts are from the spiritual region. You know, even if in India, if you go to Buddha, if you study his life, and if you study his teaching, it's of a non-violence. So whatever inspiration is coming, it's coming from the South Asian philosophers and the South Asian, we can say, people, rather than imported from somewhere. So I would not call it that whose philosophy it was first or who introduced it. But I would say that Mahatma Gandhi worked in his communities using the non-violence and using the appeal of non-violence to his people. And of course, they were together in the freedom struggle. But calling this that whose idea was this, if you go deeper into the debate and discussion, then it's basically an African philosophers whose ideas were borrowed. He worked because Mahatma Gandhi worked in African region, and there he learned from the communities. It's also a very rich part of the world. So I would not say that who exactly was copying whom. I would say that both were working for their communities using the appeal of non-violence, which is, I think, very much needed by Pakistan and India both. I would say that we need to revive Mahatma Gandhi teaching in India, keeping in mind the present scenario and situation. And similarly, we also need Bacha Khan here. Why I'm saying and why we are teaching him in the course, because these are local people and local voices and local actions are more important to be taught, because it's easier for the student to grasp. It's easier for the people to understand. It is more acceptable to the people. Foreign ideas are never accepted, even if you impose some foreign idea. So if you're teaching foreign idea, that would not work. That's why I introduced Bacha Khan in my course, because we need to learn the local voices and local actions.
Thank you very much. In the end of this book, My Life and Struggle, Bacha Khan saying that non-violent. Yes, do you want to say something? Yes.
Yes. On this specific question, just let me put it straight. Bacha Khan organized the Khudai Khidmatgars around non-violence much before he had any association with Gandhiji or with his Congress party.
True.
Bacha Khan believes in non-violence as a philosophy and not a policy, like the Indian National Congress did.
True.
So he is the one who got this from his own circumstances and idea.
Thank you. Yes, this is very true. And in the end of the book, he writes that non-violence is a strategy for Gandhiji and a life philosophy for me. So he believed in that. Khattak Saib, this question was asked in somewhere else too. And you also, initially in your speaking, you divided Bacha Khan's life in two phases. One was fighting imperialism, and the second phase was fighting for human rights and democracy in Pakistan, or the country which was established after that. Why the book is ended there? Why he he stopped writing or narrating his autobiography after the establishment of Pakistan, or in that particular time. Like it is as far as I read, I didn't read the English version, but the Pashto version is it is ended with that. Your mic is off.
Yes, it's a very important question. I think I really don't know. I can't say with authority that he did not write it because of this reason. But what I can speculate is this. You see, it would have needed another book. You see, it's again a very long and complicated story, starting from 1947 to 1988 when he died. It's quite a long story. This is one thing. Secondly, during this Pakistan's existence, he also lived a long time in prison, and he also lived for a long time in exile. For 10 years, for example, 1962 to 72, he was in exile after spending long years inside prison. And when he came back, he started his struggle. He was again imprisoned. So there were many ups and downs. One unit was imposed. I remember seeing Bacha Khan for the first time in 1956 when I was a kid. And he visited our village. He addressed a public meeting. My father was a follower of Bacha Khan, and I went to see the meeting as a kid. I mean, I couldn't understand as to what was being said, but I saw him. And he kept coming to these people, these villages, these areas during his struggle. But I think writing about all this probably would have been a very difficult practice. And I think we need to have scholars, researchers to fill this gap and to write, because after Pakistan, we have much of record, many things are recorded. There's a lot of written material, written sources. But probably Sahibzada Sahab can throw more light on this. This is what I could say simply.
Thank you very much. Sahibzada Sahib, would you like to say anything about this question?
Yes, I am also intrigued as to why he did not continue with his life after Pakistan. But to tell you, there is a lot of material on Bacha Khan and his struggle after Pakistan. And I have just alluded to it in the epilogue of the book of what he did and how he struggled right on to his old age, particularly against the governments that were in power and the proposed Kalabagh Dam. So there is a lot of material, and a lot can be written, and possibly Noreen Nasir can prompt one of our students to do research on this aspect and bring out a PhD dissertation on the thing.
Sure.
Thank you, Sahibzada Sahib. Bakhtiar Khan, probably it's Bakhtiar Khan from audience, asked you the question that what aspects of life of Bacha Khan's inspire you the most? What aspects of Bacha Khan's life inspire you the most?
What aspects of Bacha Khan's life
inspire you the most?
What? It's the spirituality of the man that speaks through all his actions in the book. That is one aspect which inspired me the most. The other, of course, is non-violent struggle against all forms of dictatorship and foreign imperialism, and his humanitarianism. These are, in essence, what inspired me the most.
Thank you. Khatak Saib, another someone from audience asked you that question, that does nonviolence affect civil rights movements? How does it influence it? Your mic is off. Sorry.
Yes, it has a very deep impact on non-violence has deep impact on civil rights movements. You see, one great strength of the PTM is its being non-violent. Yesterday, I was in Jani Khel, Waziristan, where people are protesting. Yesterday, I visited them. And I can assure you that they were so confident, those people, and they knew they were up against odds, great odds. But you see, they were very confident of themselves because they were non-violent. They were committed to not harm anyone. So this is the strength of civil rights movements. You see, it makes it very difficult for the states, oppressive states, I mean, not normal states. Normal states are supposed to help civil rights movements, but oppressive states, authoritarian states, dictatorial states, when they oppress, it's very difficult to oppress non-violence because you see, in violent movement, they have a pretext. They bring aeroplanes, they bring tanks, and they bring guns. But you see, with non-violence needs, as rightly pointed out earlier, it needs more courage. You see, it's more difficult than violence. But those who wage non-violence, they're formidable people, and it's not easy to push them back. So for civil rights movement, I think this model of non-violence is particularly important.
Thank you. Dr. Nasreen, if you may ask this question, that this is also from audience, says that, is nonviolence policy working? It does not seem to work with PTM in Pakistan or peasants in India, governments or suppressing these nonviolent movements.
Well, if you look at history, because PTM is very much new phenomena and it's a very much new movement, I would say. And they are here only for, I think, last 3 years. So it's not much time. We simply cannot tell. But if we look at if we look at the history of the non-violent movements, if it is King Martin Luther, if it's Nelson Mandela, if anyone that is advocate of the non-violence, it doesn't vanish away from the history. It has not vanished away from history. We are still learning from these non-violent movements, and of course Khudai Khidmatgar. Let's not forget about that. It started as a social reformer movement and the social reforms, but of course it started. It was like creating a civil society of Pakhtuns. I see Khudai Khidmatgar as creating a civil society of Pakhtuns. So, and a civil society always play a very constructive role in peace building processes, which I believe that even in Pakistan, we see different civil society organizations, we see different and they take all the inspirations from the Khudai Khidmatgar. And I've never seen anyone saying anything other than the propaganda which is carried out, and of course it's a part of the movement, and it's there in the politics, in the social structures, and so what I see, that I don't see failure in non-violence. I don't see any regression in non-violence. I see it's always played a constructive role, whether it's reforming the society or whether it's reforming the state, changing the state policies. And look at civil rights movement in United States of America. Although still there is much to do in that regard, but we see that the voices that emerged are still resonating, and we are still referring to them. We are still learning from them. So I don't see failure in the nonviolence, and it's something which is which I study as a student of political science. I see it goes a long way. It does not. Fine. It has its highs and lows. and it has its pros and cons, and it has its disadvantages because you don't see the instant results. But then in peace, you are never looking for instant result. In peace, you are looking in reforming the society, in reforming the structures, in reforming the policies of the state. So in reforming the structures, in reforming of the state policies, it's not easy. You cannot do it in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. You see the Khudai Khidmatgar, it's a long spell. And you see that how it's a big, and now even still the Bacha Khan School Foundation is in fact a reflection of that Khudai Khidmatgar. So it's still there, it's present, and it will be present. It cannot be eliminated because it is based on the non-violence.
Thank you. I have this question in mind, Mosazeh, for you. What can we learn from Bacha Khan in current peace process in Afghanistan? Is there anything we can relate? Is there anything that can be useful for political settlement, for peace?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Bacha Khan, as I tried to outline, is directly relevant to today, to what's happening in the region, to both to the war making and peacemaking that's taking place right now. And as I tried to explain, I think the first lesson that we can draw from Bacha Khan's philosophy and from his model is the futility of violence. The fact that violence perhaps harms the perpetrator more than the victim in a lot of cases. And the fact that I think we've seen that in our recent history, not even needing to go into the distant past, but over the past 30, 35 years, we have experienced situations where warring parties have opted for continuing violence instead of coming together and seeking a political resolution, because fundamentally this is a political dispute. It's a political disagreement over minor and major issues. And that has given us this 42 or 43-year tragedy that's still continuing in the country today. So I think the lesson that both the Afghan government, the Taliban, as well as those countries that are involved in the ongoing war in Afghanistan, including Pakistan, can draw from Bacha Khan is to put peace first and to seek a political resolution to the war that ensures the legitimate interests and concerns of all parties involved. So I think his example is not just for relevant in terms of looking at the past, but definitely looking at the present, and also looking at how we can work together to enhance the welfare and development of our societies.
Thank you very much. This is kind of continuation of the same question, but if anyone wants to answer it, it's open for all of you. What should be done to improve relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan so that they can live in peace and harmony? No one wants to talk about it?
Then I think it's basically putting peace.
No. Why not? I think this is a very important question for all of us, those who are living in this region, living this violence, seeing it, experiencing it. And I think peace is the very important question for all of us. And that's why we are here to discuss Bacha Khan and his philosophy. I believe people-to-people contact. I believe that civil society's involvement in struggle for changing the policies of both the states, our state in way that forcing the state to at least change the securitization to the development and the other issues rather than using war as an economic leverage, but trade and commerce as an economic leverage, and using this geography, which Afrasiab Khatak Saab has mentioned in the beginning, that our geography is our enemy, which Bacha Khan also, we can make this geographical location as our strength too. If combined together, both the communities, and I'm not saying only Pakhtun, I think Pakistanis and Afghans from both sides, no matter whatever the ethnicity is, I think joining together, working for the welfare of the people, forcing or at least convincing the state to change the policies inside and outside, in a peaceful manner, of course. This is the lesson of the Bacha Khan. And people-to-people contact. This is very important. And that people-to-people contact can be through traders, can be through teachers, can be through writers, can be through civil society organizations, or can be of any level or student. We are having, at the moment, I have 6 Afghan students who are on the Allama Iqbal scholarship, and they are 3 of them are enrolled with us in PhD, and 3 are enrolled in the MPhil class. So I think these kind of contacts will build this trust between the common people and masses, and then we would be able to convince our governments and state to have policies which are based on development and peace rather than on securitization.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We will be concluding in 5 minutes. I would like to hear your final remarks, and we will start from Sahibzada Sahib. Sahibzada Sahib. I think he is not. Okay, Khatak Sahib, we can hear from you. We'll come back to him.
Okay, Sahibzada Sahib.
Yeah, Sahibzada Sahib, it works.
No.
Just sit here.
No comments from me.
Thank you. Okay, Khatak Sahib.
Yes, if I may, yes.
Yes, you can. Yes.
Okay, I think this continuation of the war is because of the policies pursued by states, but I think Pakistan is responsible fundamentally for this situation because of this policy of the so-called strategic depth. I think for any peaceful coexistence between 2 states, the first and the most important thing is to accept the existence of the other as equal, independent partner or neighbor. But unfortunately, this policy which Pakistani state has followed from the last 40 years of the so-called strategic depth has created a lot of problem. And I'm really worried about the coming situation because for geography, big powers always fight these wars here. You see Soviet Union and American or European opposition to each other had polarized Europe, but their hot war was fought on our side. Similarly, the new Cold War between China and the United States can polarize East Asia and maybe other parts of the world. But I'm really worried about the prospects of physical clashes in our region at our cost, because these war machines, structures, terrorist structures, extremist structures created for the last Cold War have not been dismantled. And I'm really very disappointed to see the attitude of the big powers to ignore this fact. And I think ultimately it will harm everyone, not just people of Afghanistan and Pakistan, which will suffer the most. But I think it will be, as in 90s we saw, attacks were launched, terrorist attacks were launched in 4 continents of the world. And we saw 9/11 and other things. So let's not repeat that history and dismantle terrorist and extremist structures. Thank you.
I'd like to add one thing.
Sure.
With regard to strategic depth, which was a part of the strategy and policy of Pakistan that has very clearly been dismantled. And Imran Khan, the Prime Minister, is on record as saying that he and Bajwa are no longer interested in strategic depth and would like the Afghans to take their own decisions.
Thank you. Musazai sir?
I will just say that I hope what Sahib Zada Sahib has just mentioned comes true. Because if we have Afghanistan and Pakistan on the same page, if we have the civilian government and the military in Pakistan on the same page, I think we can end this war quickly and usher in an era of peace and very close cooperation between Afghanistan and Pakistan, which would uplift the entire region. But I also just wanted to end by saying that for us, the people of Afghanistan on the Afghanistan side of the Durand line, one lesson that I think we can really draw from Bacha Khan's legacy and focus on is his success in inculcating a tradition and a culture of organization, of organizing rather, of social organizing, political organizing. And I think the reason why we see the existence of strong, robust political parties and social movements among Pashtuns on the Pakistan side of the Durand line is because of what Bacha Khan did and because of the hard work that he and his Khidmatgars put in, and the political parties that now we see in Pakhtunkhwa, in Balochistan, but also movements such as the PTM. I think they're all based on that foundation that he laid down. And I think we can learn from that, and we must pay practical attention to that.
Thank you. Dr. Nasreen?
Yes, Shafiqa, thank you very much for giving us this platform and opportunity. It was important to thank you first, and then I'll make my final comment about this book. I would come to. I think this book provide us an insight into the life of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, very popularly known as Bacha Khan. I don't only see him as a social reformer, but also a feminist Pakhtun, a sensitive, caring person who is not only caring about the humans, but animals too, who is against the un-Islamic cultural practices. He's not against the Islam. I have to repeat it again because there is a lot of propaganda carried against him. He is a secular man. He's not an atheist. In a broader context, if we see him, he is a man for all season, and we can study him in any context, even if we are discussing social reforms, if we are discussing peace building, if we are discussing political structure. For me, he is a full institution that can be understood and read, and then taught to the student and taught to the common people, so we can learn from his life and his contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and my apologies for mispronouncing your name. I put my glasses. So we have come to the end of today's discussion. It was a great honor to be part of. Would you like to say something?
Sorry, I apologize deeply, but I just wanted to plug in a brief word about the book and the fact that audience members and people who might see this recording later can obtain the book from Folio books in Pakistan, from Rolio books in India, and also from Amazon globally. So that's all I wanted to say, and just encourage everyone to read the book. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it was a great honor to be part of this wonderful and great discussion. Yes, and once again, congratulations to Sahib Zada Sahib for doing the amazing job and translating Bacha Khan's autobiography conveying his message to the whole world, and Folio Books for publishing this book. As Ambassadors Musa Zaisab mentioned, you can order it from Amazon. And yeah, this was all. Thank you, everyone. I would like to end this discussion with a quote from Bacha says that my religion is truth, love and service to God and humanity. Every religion that has come into the world has brought the message of love and brotherhood. Those who are indifferent to the welfare of their fellow men, whose hearts are empty of love, they do not know the meaning of religion. Goodbye, stay safe, be kind.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.